Fukushima. Description of the accident and consequences to the environment. Vifiamaharemi. Before the accident. Location of FNPP. Fukushima. Japan's worst nuclear disaster was triggered by the massive earthquake and tsunami that occurred on March 11, 2011. The Fukushima Daiichi No. 1 plant in northern Japan was struck by the tsunami generated by the earthquake, and the wave damaged the complex's backup power generators. What happened at Fukushima? On the 11th of March 2011, a magnitude 9.0 earthquake struck off the coast of Japan, followed by a tsunami that slammed the country's eastern coast, destroying communities and taking the lives of tens of thousands of people. The event led to the biggest nuclear disaster since Chernobyl in 1986. It also exposed serious failures in the Japanese system for ensuring the safety of nuclear reactors. Although the reactors were successfully shut down, the loss of primary and backup power caused the plant's cooling system to fail within days, and a series of explosions led to the release of substantial amounts of radioactive material. Workers spent more than a month trying to bring the situation under control, and tens of thousands of residents were evacuated from the area. What is radiation? Radiation is a form of energy. There are several types of radiation: heat, light, microwave and nuclear. The common characteristic of nuclear radiation is that it is so energetic that it can destroy molecules. Heat and sunlight are unable to do such damage. Nuclear crisis timeline. March 2011, a magnitude 9.0 earthquake strikes off the east coast of Japan. A large tsunami follows. External power is lost at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Backup generators also go down. Find out how the Fukushima nuclear disaster unfurled. Liability for a nuclear disaster. The nuclear industry has managed to build a system in which they, the polluters, harvest large profits, while the moment things go wrong, they throw the responsibility for dealing with losses and the costs of damages to the citizens affected by a nuclear disaster. Nuclear power, dirty, dangerous and expensive. Nuclear reactors are inherently unsafe. As happened after Chernobyl in 1986, the Fukushima nuclear disaster in March 2011 again exposed the fundamental flaws of reactors and highlighted the serious institutional failures in the oversight of nuclear safety. Costs and consequences of the Fukushima Daiichi disaster resulted in massive radioactive contamination of the Japanese mainland. In November 2011, the Japanese Science Ministry reported that long-lived radioactive cesium had contaminated 11,580 square miles, 30,000 square kilometers of the land surface of Japan. Some 4,500 square miles, an area almost the size of Connecticut, was found to have radiation levels that exceeded Japan's allowable exposure rate of 1 mSv/mV per year. And natural disasters on this scale could become more frequent. Death tolls from natural disasters have increased over the centuries because the world's population has been growing and because more people now live along low-lying coastal regions which are more vulnerable to many kinds of disasters including floods, tsunamis and cyclones. There is no evidence to say that natural disasters themselves are getting worse except maybe in terms of economic impact and death toll, says Professor Jonathan Knott, an expert on natural hazards at James Cook University in Townsville. Natural hazards in terms of the magnitude and frequency of events are not getting worse, but people are more aware of them now as media coverage is greater. Tokyo Power and Electric Company, TEPCO, the owner of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, is pursuing a timetable that will require about 2.5 years to safely remove the spent fuel assemblies from Building 4. In August, TEPCO stated that Reactor 4 building can withstand a quake in the upper 6 magnitude. Let's hope so, because experts forecast that there is a high probability of an earthquake of this magnitude or greater occurring at Fukushima. It is an open question as to whether or not Building 4 could withstand such an event. Thus the collapse of Building 4 could lead to the release of many times more radiation than has already escaped from Fukushima. This would leave much of Japan uninhabitable and would constitute a global disaster. More photos, the 20th of March 2011. In addition to its effects on land, the Fukushima disaster produced the largest discharge of radioactive material into the ocean in history. 15 months after 733,000 curies of radioactive cesium were pumped into the Pacific, 56% of all fish catches off Japan were found to be contaminated with it. Fishing continues to be banned off the coast of Fukushima, where 40% of bottom-dwelling fish, sole, halibut, cod, were recently found to have radioactive cesium levels higher than current Japanese regulatory limits. Once a large amount of radioactive cesium enters an ecosystem, it quickly becomes ubiquitous, contaminating water, soil, plants and animals. It has been detected in a large range of Japanese foodstuffs, including spinach, tea leaves, milk, beef, and freshwater fish up to 200 miles from Fukushima. Radioactive cesium bioaccumulates, bioconcentrates, and biomagnifies as it moves up the food chain. Routine ingestion of foods contaminated with so-called low levels of radioactive cesium has been shown to lead to its bioaccumulation in the heart and endocrine tissues, as well as in the kidneys, small intestines, pancreas, spleen and liver. This process occurs much faster in children than in adults, and children are many times more susceptible than adults to the effects of the ionizing radiation their internal organs are then exposed to. More photos, the 11th of March 2011. Radioactive cesium has taken up residence in the exclusion zone, replacing the human inhabitants. Cesium-137 has a half-life of 30 years, and since it takes about 10 half-lives for any radionuclide to disappear, it will maintain ownership of the exclusion zone for centuries. The precise value of the abandoned cities, towns, agricultural lands, businesses, homes and property located within the roughly 310 square miles, 800 square kilometers of the exclusion zones has not been established. Estimates of the total economic loss range from $250 for -$500 billion US. As for the human costs, in September 2012, Fukushima officials stated that 159,128 people had been evicted from the exclusion zones, losing their homes and virtually all their possessions. Most have received only a small compensation to cover their cost of living as evacuees. Many are forced to make mortgage payments on the homes they left inside the exclusion zones. They have not been told that their homes will never again be habitable. The 17th of March 2011. Reactor No3. However, all of the land within 12 miles, 20 kilometers of the destroyed nuclear power plant, encompassing an area of about 230 square miles, 600 square kilometers, and an additional 80 square miles, 200 square kilometers, located northwest of the plant, were declared too radioactive for human habitation. All persons living in these areas were evacuated and the regions were declared to be permanent exclusion zones. The 20th of March 2011. Reactors 1, 2, 3 from left to right. Other forms of maintenance are also required to avoid potentially catastrophic radiation-releasing events. The intense gamma radiation from the melted fuel causes the water to dissociate into hydrogen and oxygen gas. In order to prevent further hydrogen explosions, which have already destroyed the buildings housing reactors 1, 3 and 4, nitrogen gas must be continually pumped into the leaking containment vessel. This process must continue for another 6 or 7 years. Reactor building number 4 was severely damaged by the earthquake and a massive hydrogen explosion. It holds a spent fuel pool with 1,532 nuclear fuel assemblies, which contain about 10 times more radioactive cesium than was released by the Chernobyl disaster. Should Building 4 collapse, its fuel pool would lose its cooling water, and the gamma radiation from the exposed fuel assemblies would then be immediately lethal to anyone within 300 feet. It would be impossible to access the site, including the common pool that contains 6,000 fuel assemblies, which is located 50 feet from Building 4. There are 23 nuclear reactors of the same design as those at Fukushima now operating in the US. US spent fuel pools contain many times more spent fuel than the spent fuel pool at Reactor Building 4 in Fukushima Daiichi. It is past time to shut these reactors down and place their spent fuel rods in dry cask storage, which is not vulnerable to a loss of coolant disaster. Nuclear power, dirty, dangerous and expensive. Nuclear reactors are inherently unsafe. As happened after Chernobyl in 1986, the Fukushima nuclear disaster in March 2011 again exposed the fundamental flaws of reactors and highlighted the serious institutional failures in the oversight of nuclear safety. Renewable energy is the future. Renewable energy is a viable option for replacing the world's dirty, dangerous and terribly expensive nuclear reactors. The nuclear disaster at Fukushima in March 2011 again exposed the inherent dangers of nuclear reactors.